Good morning. Good morning. You're with Jeff and Eric again, Courageous Conviction Media. Today we got some cool things to talk about. Well, actually, agency, if you want to really break it down, agency is a principle that governs the gods, right? And they have to show an understanding of that. That's something we're going to have to we show an understanding for the intelligence to actually approve us to becoming a God one day, and we believe that's eternal progression, right? That we will be like our Father in heaven. We're created in similitude as He is, and we can be that way. And that doesn't demean Him. That means we got a lot of work to do, right? Yeah. But
long way to go.
Yeah, but they're going to make their mistakes along the way, but they will never take agency from us. And that back when you were talking about the jab, with the first president coming out, and like I said, it back down in Ecuador, the Area 70 were going around saying it has to be this way. You have to go get vaccinated. If you do not, then you are not being obedient to the prophet. And yet, at the same time, my state president was bothered with that because one, it took away agency, right? And I was explaining to you that we had to go. There was some draconian rules that were just being handed down from this authoritarian type of leadership that were akin to general authorities down there, right? We're talking about the area presidency. Just basically saying you can't go to chapel unless you have a vaccine card, And so when I mentioned to you that when we were talking before that there's something that took place as my state president and I were very close and worked together on this, that a lot of people didn't understand. His two counselors, I was in the high council, and there was one other high councilman, he got it. But it was just my state president, myself, and one other. Everybody else was very pro, do what the government says, follow the government, look towards the government for the money, right, to sustain ourselves. And the 70 were even saying, don't worry about it. Don't worry about food storage. Go to the bishop and go to the government and get what they're giving you. And I thought to myself, I had a hard time with that because we had just studied the year before the law of consecration and what that means, right? And the self-sufficiency, the autosufficiency that comes along with that and the responsibilities. And so I was having a tough time with that. And, it was kind of interpretations, but that doesn't mean that the church was wrong.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? And my state president went back to these people and letters were sent by their president saying, hey, nobody comes in without a COVID card. State president comes back and says, with all due respect, I think that we're violating agency here. And they take it back to the Lord as area of presidency, write a letter 2 days later, write my state president and said, we appreciate you calling that to our attention. And we took it back to the Lord, and that was our opinion. And now this is what the Lord actually wants. And he came back and said, you cannot ask for a COVID card to get into chapels. You have to allow agency to take place, and people have their freedom to choose, right? But it took us standing up to that. And sometimes that's necessary today because the church is growing so fast. It's growing so fast that, I forget the numbers. My stake president was telling me the numbers of new stake presidents and bishops called like every month in the world. And so
there's something like 236 new missions that are being made right now.
It's incredible if you think about it. Yeah, there's more missionaries now than ever been in the history of the church, which is awesome for this generation, And this generation should give us hope. This generation now that's coming in their 20s now, they are much more conservative than prior generations. Probably since my grandparents, And so we're seeing that across the board. And a lot of my sources of information, my good, reliable source of information are saying the same thing. Not from a church dynamic, but for more of a defense of liberty dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we just need to get to the point that put your testimony in the Book of Mormon. That book is true. I promise that. I have 25 years of searching for the remnants of the of these peoples that were once walked as Americas, and from North America all around the tips of Patagonia, we were talking about earlier, of Argentina and Chile. We studied for 25 years. And I'm telling you right now that I have been and seen and touched and felt things that I know were there because the peoples of the Book of Mormon once occupied those areas, right? Yeah. And those are things I hope we get into more in the podcast. I hope we share a lot of that stuff too. But I just wanted to say that if we want to look and put our leaders up or hear things about Joseph or any other leaders for that matter, Brigham made that comment that he was concerned that the members would only follow, that they wouldn't seek for themselves. And that's why we talked about what we want to do in the next podcast is go through and break down Section 88, 77 through 81 that we discussed earlier, and kind of break that down on how we magnify our callings, how we prepare ourselves, how we become the dads, the priesthood holders, the fathers, the husbands that are going to be necessary to go forward and face the challenges that are coming. Because I'm telling you right now, there are challenges coming. And I don't want to say it to be doomsday. They're coming. We got the CDBC, a digital dollar coming, which is going to be full control, no privacy. You got the Fed Now program that's been rolled out. Now 200 banks we were talking about earlier are in the Fed Now program. That's not the banking system. That's the Federal Reserve taking over the banking system on their payment platform. But the goal of this is to be our one-stop shop. Now you've got guys like Elon Musk with X are trying to rival this, and that's why he's fallen under DOJ investigation now with all of his companies. They're just trying to push this back. So there's going to be a shock of less freedom. There's going to be a shock of censoring taking place for us. Maybe our podcast will get canned. We'll have to figure out here on YouTube, at least. We will be on Rumble. So listeners, also, please, below you'll find our link to Rumble. So if anything happens here on YouTube, we'll be on Rumble. Substack, we're going to start doing some things where we're going to do some newsletters and stuff like that too down the road. So Jeff and I have been talking about where we want to take this to another level. Why? Because we want to help people not make the mistakes we made. It's not greener pasture out there. I promise you. I've been married 4 times. 4 times I thought that I could do better, right? And right now my relationship is the most difficult of the 4. If you want to really break it down, I married a Latina girl. Nothing against Latinas, but they're kind of becoming strong-headed when they want to be. And Jeff and I both know that. We're both married to Latin women. And I love my wife. However, the one thing that came to me now in my mature years is I'm angry at things, but a righteous anger, right? Mm-hmm. And when we let anger build up and go beyond that righteous anger, that indignation, I should say, it festers, as you mentioned earlier. And all that's going to do is carry over into our families. We're not going to be good husbands. We're not going to be good fathers. We're not going to work good because we're going to be all caught up in anger to try to prove the church wrong. Why are we trying to prove church wrong? Because we know it's right.
Right.
And we're stumbling over that on our way out. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, we've talked about spiritual things. We've talked about physical things, temporal things. I carry a gun. I didn't used to. I believe in the Second Amendment. And, I got my, I've had a concealed license for several years now. And, but now, when that started, I was worried at first. I'm like, am I going to carry a gun when I'm driving the car? Yeah. Is it loaded? Yeah. Now when somebody passes me by and flips me off, I smile at them. Right. Because, I don't want to have that altercation. My mindset is different. I think it's more about being peaceful. And, I got to say that I don't agree with a lot of people that are against guns. And I think if you are, then maybe you shouldn't have one. That's fine. But it still should be a choice. And I don't want to go off too much on a tangent there. I think the main thing I was looking at is we don't have to get angry, anymore, but you still need to be able to be prepared in every sense.
Well, I think, hold on. Now, I would say that we need to be a little more angry, but a righteous anger. We need to be indignant of what's taking place right now in our school system, what's filtered into the church right now, too. And I'm not saying that the first presidency knows this. And the more I understand what the load they carry, the more I understand there's no way that they can be on top of everything. They have to assign other people. Look, I was a CEO. And there was no way I could do everything and know everything that was going on. I had a meeting every Monday morning with all my management in the company. And I would sit down and we would talk and go back and forth for the first 4 hours of the week. And that's how we started our week, right? It was this communication thing. And that was how I was able to keep tabs. But I wasn't the one that was out doing things in the field. I wasn't the one that was turning in the final copies of the drawings or whatever we were working on. I was just reviewing it, and then that person would take it and give it to the proper, government agencies or whatever where we're working at. Same within church. You can go back. I was just listening to Hannah Stoddard They have the Joseph Smith Foundation. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's something her father started a while ago, but she was on the Ward Radio last week.
Oh no.
Yeah, they had her on, and she was explaining. She does a lot of research, and I really love her research. They do a really good job. Her dad taught her well. She said since she was 8, she was taught how to research. And I thought, boy, I'm lacking. I'm just reading my daughter. Maybe I got to teach how to research. And it was interesting. She explained, because they work a lot with the church. They work a lot with leaders in the church and the first presidency. They have access to a lot of areas. And she was saying that a series of books that they just recently released on how the history of the church was written, but the church was actually penetrated years ago, and the history department was governed by a Marxist. And he wrote the history erroneously of the church. And that's why we're having so many, like people are feeling that things were hidden from them. It wasn't. It's just that this was under the management of somebody that was trusted and somebody who felt, he said in his own writings, he said that the Lord called him there to right the wrongs in the church. And so you have that still in the church, and you have that in the church offices. I read a book a couple years ago where President Benson is cited and talked about what he was looking. He gave a talk against communism. He was very much against, and because he was with Khrushchev. Yeah, I do too. And I think we need to go back and listen to those too, right? And we don't just throw those out. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Because we have a current prophet. Otherwise we just take all our scriptures and throw them all away and just listen to the prophet. But even Brigham said, that's not what we're here for. He said, he was concerned as prophet that we would only just follow. We wouldn't seek to understand, right? And we have an obligation to understand. That's Section 88, which we'll go into in our next podcast, or next series of episodes. But I it's just,
we got to be engaged. If people aren't engaged in church, it becomes boring. And why go back to church if you're not really engaged, if you're not a part of the process? And maybe that's some of the reason people are leaving. And we got to find that out. Why are people leaving? The ones that come home from their missions. Why did we leave? Is it the same thing? It's the same reason? Maybe. I think so. At least
I'll just say this right now. For me, I was the type of person that prior to the pandemic, I loved going to church. My home was always chaotic in the morning, getting everybody ready. And I will say that since I was a kid, and it's carried over to my adult life. And I try to not let that happen. Mm-hmm. But it always seems like we're running late. We got to get out the door. Somebody's dragging their feet, and it gets a little frustrating. So by the time I get to church, I'm already a little frustrated. I guess that's why they want us to start 20 minutes early. Maybe we can cool down. Yeah. But yeah, we don't. Right now though, Jeff, I don't have that same desire. Do I look to try to attack the church and to follow it? No. Why don't I have that desire? Well, I'm in a blue state. And my ward's very divided, and I feel like I'm being censored. I can't speak. Now, you were talking about we don't want to lose the 100 or 150 that do show up, right? We already some wards have 500 members on their books, and yet we're getting maybe 80 on an average, and that's what branches get. We're getting 80 to 120 people in sacrament meetings, and like you said, well, that has a valid point. We don't discuss these issues. And what was more clarified recently to me was what we're not supposed to discuss is party lines, like political party lines and political candidates, right? But the point of being able to talk about Marxism and whether it pulls you or doesn't, that was never really clarified until recently. It's just general, we're going to kind of basically stay away from the politics. At church, that does not mean we don't learn those things in our life. Right.
Let me tell you a story because it touches on this, because I don't want to lose it. And I have this Native American friend. He's Navajo. And he's in another. I've got two of them. One's in my ward, and there's another one that, and he used to be he's still a politician kind of guy. He works for the government. The one that's in my ward, but he's not the one I'm talking about. The other one is more this liberal guy, Native American, big hoop earrings, and the last time I went to the temple, I went with him, And it's not because he's a temple going guy. It took him since COVID to go to the temple, him and his wife. And anyway, so we talk a lot of stuff, and I know he's, a little bit out there on the liberal side. My brother brings it up to me as well because he knows him better than I do. The other day we were sitting there, and he's got his mask on. Sometimes he's been taking it off, and we never talk about that. But every once in a while I bring something up. I'm like, oh, we could go out to the desert and shoot sometime. I don't know how that came up, but I'm like, he goes, well, I don't have guns. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a gun nut. I'm not a gun lover, but I've got this, this automatic rifle that we can go out and shoot. And then he started coming up with stuff, like, well, I know where we can go. And, because I'm not from here, and so he knows where to go. I'm like, the next thing you know, I've got you know, um, somebody I can go shoot guns with. Wasn't exactly the person I thought I'd ever be going to shoot guns with, So maybe there's some camaraderie that can happen, because when people get so involved with politics, they stop doing things that are sensible, like, believe it or not, shooting guns. Isn't that kind of the American way? We can go out to the desert, set up some, a little gallery there, and hopefully we've got a little bit of a mountain there going on, and we're doing it in a safe place with safe-minded, and nobody's going out there and drinking beers and shooting guns. That's not what we're talking about. But um, but one of the reasons he said that he was thinking about not coming back to church and that he left the church in the first place, because we got into that conversation, was because there wasn't enough brown people at church. And I said, there are brown people. Look at my wife, she's brown. He goes, no, that's not the kind of brown I'm talking about. I mean, like Native Americans. I'm like, well, then you need to pick it up, because we need you. We need you to invite some more of your family, and we need to make it more brown. I mean, I don't know what we got to do, but we can't have the division, and we need you. I need to see you. Do it for, yourself, of course. Come to church because you want to be spiritually enlightened, but we need to see you, so nobody's excluding. If it's white, then why do we have brown people that's not coming to church? Because it's white? They can make that change. And we can tell them, say, it's not like you're not wanted. I remember when my daughter was, when I gave her blessing, that was like 9 years ago. And I had some friends that were Muslim. They were from the middle of Africa. And I invited one friend to come to this, blessing. Well, he brought 8 of his friends, and they all sat in the front pews there. And this is in Willow, Alaska, right? There's like, it's pretty white. There's no black people there, but you should have seen the front. That church had a little bit of a change there that day, and everybody was coming up there like, who are you guys? I mean, you could see their eyes just popped out of their heads, and like, we want to know you. How do you know Jeff? And and this kind of stuff. And I was proud, a little taken back that all these big, huge, towering guys showed up to my little daughter's blessing, and they were all Muslim. I was just taken back. But yeah, we need to see more diversity but that kind of a diversity where we are exchanging with each other, and that there's real love of brotherhood.
There's a respect for each other's choices there, and in that regard, right? But see what we're going though now, Jeff, is where we're going to go with this is, well, the LGBTQ community wants that same respect, but then we're talking about natural law, and God's law always follows natural law, right? So, and here's my feelings on this. Here's my feelings. I go to church and I hear a lot of this neo-Marxism with this Lenin Marxism rhetoric just being preached at the pulpit as if it's it's something that is doctrinal, and we practice like this all-inclusive idea, right? And we talked about this before. Like Christ was all-inclusive for those who wanted to turn to him and have a penitent heart and come to him. And then the law of mercy extends. That's Alma 42. And, Alma's son comes with the same concerns. He doesn't want anybody to be lost. He wants everybody to be saved, so to speak, right? And Alma has to break it down. Hey, there's a law of mercy and there's a law of justice. And 2 times he says, if God ignores the law of justice, then God fails to be God. He could fail to be God. He can fall from his title and have that stripped from him. The intelligence would take that from him. And, it's really interesting, kind of a side note. Cleon Skousen, and I think most of our listeners are going to understand and respect and appreciate Cleon Skousen, and I sure do. And now, there was so much controversy with him because he kind of picked up where Benson left off, right? He was kind of the voice that was a non-authority, but yet he was groomed under all these authorities, and he wrote books requested by the authorities.
Books.
Well, and the Naked Communists, people don't realize that was a BYU program, that was written to be a program at BYU. That was going to be a class, right?
I didn't know
under
that.
David O. McKay. And what happened was I'm slipping now who the prophet who took his place. Smith. Anyway.
Joseph Smith, Joseph F.
Yeah, it might have been Joseph F.
Right? Fielding.
Yeah, it might have been Joseph Fielding Smith. I think he took his place, and he came back to Cleon. And this was written with Skousen. This was written with under the direction of the first presidency and under the direction of the president of BYU at the time, right? Uh-huh. And so that's why this program was written. And you wanted facts brought into it. Really good book. I highly recommend people read that. It was written back, I think, in the 60s.
Yeah, I think
back when the churches were being penetrated by the Communist Party, by Russia and so forth, right? And there were leaders, apostles that stood up and opposed all this, right? Yeah. Now we know that Benson was right. And he was almost alone with McKay. It was just the two of them. The other apostles didn't want to ruffle any feathers. Hugh B. Brown, a Canadian socialist, comes in and he just kind of takes that socialist mentality. We have the same thing right now with Uchtdorf, right? And I'm hearing things too that kind of got to work with Uchtdorf a little bit because he does have those leftist leaning thoughts, Yeah. But I'm not saying he's not called of God. They're here to fulfill their measure. They got to. But we also need to understand ourselves. Why we'll get into Section 88 in our next series of episodes and podcast. But we need to understand those things to make good decisions and to be able to magnify our callings, right? Okay. Coming back, though, Jeff, as you were talking about your friend, your native friend, that's where we're getting at church. And we should not be going to church looking for white, brown, whatever. We should be colorblind in the church. As good Latter-day Saints, as good Christians in the world, we should be colorblind. I don't judge a person by his color. At least I didn't until recent, all the BLM stuff. Now when I go to these areas where I know that violence exists and I see certain races, I avoid going near them. Yeah. That's now. I never had this problem when I was younger. There was this little running back, Andre Ford, a little black guy. And then there was me. We're the two smallest guys in the whole league. We were in AAA football, big school. And we're the two smallest guys on the football team, the varsity football team. And we hung out and did everything together. And I had these Mexican buddies that were like the linebackers and so forth. And, we were kind of like, I was defensive corner and you were kind of like this, we were like the part of the main team. And we all did things together. We worked as a team. Yeah. And that's what it's supposed to be in this gospel. We should not be sitting there worried about color.
Yeah. Who's white, who's black, who's brown.
Or what their sexual preference is. Right. I don't walk around with a shirt saying, I like boobs. Sorry, but that's the truth, right? I don't do that. And here on this podcast, we're going to talk about things that are kind of more, I'm not going to say in the fringe, but things are less easy to talk about. And, the first presidency, Jeff, I'll give the time back to you here to conclude. Under David O. McKay, actually, with Joseph Fielding Smith, I believe it was. Like, don't quote me on that, but we're coming along. The idea of what we talk about and don't talk about in church when it comes to politics and the suggestions made. Now, we have the current prophet and his suggestions, right? And that's been clarified as party lines and candidates, right? But I think we got to be very careful even with this whole talking about even saying, hey, socialism, communism, Marxism at church even anymore is almost going to be offensive to some if you're living in a blue state where you have mixed congregation, right? And so I think what you shot me about Joseph Smith and told me about, you allowed me to participate in this stuff, new stuff going on about Joseph Smith. This news, it heavied my heart. And I thought to myself, I can see why our leaders aren't so focused on keeping up with the political things. They've got an idea, but they don't understand the full details, I don't feel, by choices they're making, things they're saying, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're right now more concerned, Jeff, about what you're talking about. People are so sensitive right now. And the church is very sensitive too about bad publicity. I mean, look what they did with Tim Ballard. Basically, just kind of threw him under the bus and Tim Ballard should be a guy that we could boister up as one of the articles of faith in our 13th article of faith, right? That we do things exactly right. We do things that are praiseworthy.
Right.
And here's a man who's praiseworthy, and the church is the first opposition against him, which was going to come because those elites, the World Economic Forum with the United Nations, the whole agenda is going to try to keep this agenda moving where they've got it going right now. They got a jump start on it. Those tears will lock us down, and they're not going to let that go, right?
Yeah,
Jeff.
well, it's hard to understand where that the opposition is coming from and why,
But it's not. They're secret combinations, and if we look at the Book of Mormon, it explains it. I mean, I just pulled something up the other day in Alma 46, and I started going through it and started talking about where the corruption came in to overthrow the freedom and overthrow the government of the people, right, of the church.
That's the quest, on the other side. Yeah, they want to do that, but
that hasn't stopped.
Yeah, it's always been that way. You're right, but now it's just in those little bit of increments since like Benson and and David O. McKay that you mentioned before. We've had these hardliners, even before that, Brigham Young. We've had these hardliners, but they get, little bit of increments, where we get a little bit of socialism, a little bit of Marxism nestled into the church, and it starts to grow and fester. And people believe that that's Christ's way. Well, Christ's way is being peaceful, but there's also a soldier side, and we have to be able to stand up, and there's got to be able to, you got to be able to draw a line, And
no, see, I would argue that Christ was peaceful. And I would only argue it in this way. He never backed down from defending the truth. And that meant people got offended and left him.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying to be wishy-washy. I'm not saying back down. I think I'm looking at peaceful. I carry a gun because I'm peaceful.
I like that. You should put a shirt up there. That's the one we can sell. I carry a gun because I'm peaceful. I like that.
Right. Yep. And the first time I open carried one time, I did it by accident up in Alaska, and it was legal there, So, and I had my older RV, and I'm driving along, and I'm eating these, hot chips or stuff with this red stuff all over, and I'm wiping my pants down, my jeans. We've been out camping, and I walk into the store with this, big firearm strapped to my side, 44.
Please, subscribe below. It's free. Hit that button down below, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, send this out to your friends. It's our new podcast. Jeff and I have these experiences that we've lived outside the country many years of our lives.